Anxiety is not always easy to recognize. Sometimes it hides behind subtle behaviors like replaying a conversation for hours or feeling like everything is falling apart at the slightest unexpected event. Even if no one notices, you know something is off. Want to find out if these signs are present in your life? How have you been dealing with it? Tell me in the comments and let's talk. It's astonishing to think that around 40 million people worldwide suffer from anxiety. This means that at any given moment, millions are dealing with racing thoughts, constant worries, and intense physical sensations. However, the most alarming thing isn't just the number, but the fact that only 36.9% of these people seek treatment. And why is that? The fear of being judged or stigmatized for having anxiety is something that holds many people back. Imagine living in a world where you have to hide what you're feeling just to avoid stares or comments. It's like trying to swim against the current without ever asking for help, even though there's a life preserver right there. For many, what prevents them from seeking support is the stigma associated with it. Society still holds that outdated notion that those who suffer from anxiety aren't strong enough. The result? People who could be living fully end up carrying an enormous and unnecessary emotional burden. They suffer in silence, as if admitting their vulnerability were a weakness. But the reality is that facing anxiety head-on is an act of courage, not the opposite. For those still feeling this fear, it is essential to understand that seeking treatment is one of the first steps toward true emotional freedom. Now, if we stop to think, anxiety affects people differently depending on the culture and environment we live in. In some countries, talking about mental health is more common, while in others, it is practically taboo. Have you ever wondered how cultural differences impact anxiety treatment? In some places, even the idea of talking to a psychologist is seen as a sign of weakness. Unfortunately, this contributes to the low global treatment rate. However, what many don't realize is that anxiety transcends borders, languages, and customs. It is a universal human experience. But what if people could see that there are accessible solutions for anxiety? What if they knew they didn't have to deal with it alone? Fortunately, awareness about mental health is growing, and with it, the options for treatment. From traditional therapies to more modern approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy or mindfulness practices, there are paths for those seeking relief from anxiety. Have you ever thought about trying some of these practices? Even simple activities like guided meditation can help reduce symptoms. During today's video, besides the main topics, I'd like to share something that has made a difference for me. Recently, I started using Cineboost, which has been helping me improve focus, energy, and even reduce anxiety in my daily life. If you're interested in learning more, check out the pinned comment, and the best part is, you only pay for shipping. The journey of those facing anxiety can be lonely, but it doesn't have to be. For many, the simple act of acknowledging the problem is already a big victory. And this brings us to a crucial point: the difficulty many people have in face-to-face interactions, something we will explore next. Many people dealing with anxiety face a real barrier when it comes to face-to-face interactions. The internet becomes a kind of refuge where it's easier to talk, express opinions, and even socialize without the weight of eye contact. Have you noticed how it's easier to send a message than to face a live conversation? For someone with anxiety, this can be even more challenging. The simple act of making eye contact can trigger a wave of discomfort, often paralyzing the person in that moment. Technology can be a relief, but are we distancing ourselves from deeper connections? In social settings, anxiety can manifest in subtle ways, such as avoiding conversations or trying to escape casual encounters. The famous, "sorry, I have to go now," is the perfect excuse for someone who feels overwhelmed by the idea of maintaining a conversation. Have you noticed how often you or someone close leaves an event early without a clear reason? This could be a reflection of the difficulty of being present in live interactions. Even in situations where everyone is relaxed and smiling, the anxious mind is always projecting scenarios of judgment or failure. The fear of doing something wrong during a conversation is also always present. Did I talk too much? Did I interrupt? Believe me, This detailed analysis happens all the time inside the mind of someone who suffers from anxiety. This cycle of thoughts can become so intense that the person opts to avoid any direct interaction altogether. And so, opportunities to make new friends or even strengthen bonds slip away. A practical example would be participating in a support group or group therapy, a chance to practice these interactions in a safer, more controlled way. For many, maintaining a conversation goes beyond words. It's a mental game of trial and error. With each sentence, the anxious mind tries to predict the other's reaction, which only increases the stress. Making eye contact, then, is like trying to balance a stack of plates. It could all collapse at any moment. But what can be done to improve this? Simple practices like holding eye contact for a few seconds and then gradually looking away can help. Start small, in environments where you feel safer, like among friends or family. This kind of gradual approach can make a big difference. But of course, not everything is solved immediately. Anxiety in face-to-face interactions is a symptom of something deeper: constant self-criticism and self-awareness. These issues will be at the center of our next discussion. People who live with anxiety often experience a constant sense of self-consciousness. Every move, every word, every gesture seems to be under an invisible spotlight. The feeling of being constantly watched and judged can be exhausting, almost as if the person is always on stage, even in the most everyday situations. Imagine the mental effort of trying to control even the way you walk to appear normal. This kind of constant worry drains energy, making simple tasks seem like enormous challenges. For those who go through this, even a trip to the grocery store can turn into a mission full of tension. This exaggerated self-awareness often manifests in subtle but constant ways. The person may begin to focus on details that others wouldn't even notice. How is my posture? Is my clothing appropriate? Am I speaking clearly? These questions arise all the time and feed the anxiety. A good example is when someone is in a social setting, and instead of enjoying the moment, they're constantly wondering if they're behaving correctly. It's an internal battle that takes away the pleasure of just being. This excessive self-criticism can also lead people to avoid situations where they might feel exposed. Many choose not to speak in public or even skip social events to avoid this discomfort. After all, when you're so concerned about what others might be thinking, it's hard to feel comfortable in any environment. This self-consciousness, when uncontrolled, can end up limiting a person's potential, making them miss out on important opportunities in both their personal and professional lives. One way to deal with this feeling is to practice mindful presence, or mindfulness. By focusing on the present moment, a person can gradually turn off this inner critical voice. Small exercises like paying attention to your breath or observing your surroundings without judgment can help reduce this constant self-criticism. And believe it or not, practicing this for just a few minutes a day can make a big difference. Have you ever tried something like that? Maybe start during moments when you feel calmer, like when walking alone or taking a break at work. Over time, a person might realize that in reality, no one is paying as much attention as they think. The people around them are more concerned with their own lives and worries than critically analyzing others. This excessive self-consciousness is often an illusion, a distorted lens that anxiety puts over reality. And when a person understands this, they begin to set themselves free. But of course, this constant feeling of being scrutinized can lead to other behaviors, like irritability and sudden mood changes, which we'll explore next. Anxiety not only messes with your thoughts, but also deeply affects emotions, leading to unusual irritability and frequent mood swings. For someone going through this, even small things like someone speaking louder or an unexpected task can trigger an outburst of frustration. This kind of reaction is hard to control because the anxious mind is already overloaded, always on alert. The body responds to this constant state of tension, making the person more sensitive and prone to irritation. Have you noticed how on more stressful days, anything can set off an emotional outburst? These moments of irritability can come out of nowhere, and often the person themselves doesn't understand where all the anger or impatience is coming from. It might seem like the smallest inconvenience causes a disproportionate reaction. For those living with someone in this situation, it can be challenging to understand these sudden mood changes. One minute everything is fine, and the next, the person explodes over something seemingly insignificant. This behavior doesn't mean they're being difficult, but that anxiety is directly influencing their emotional state. And the most frustrating part is that often the person knows they're overreacting, but feels like they can't control it. When we talk about anxiety, these emotional swings can be seen as a release valve for accumulated tension. Imagine a pressure cooker. When stress and worries build up, there comes a point where the body simply can't hold it anymore, and then the explosion happens. Controlling this irritability may seem impossible in the moment, but there are strategies that can help. Deep breathing exercises or taking short relaxation breaks during the day are great for relieving tension before it reaches the breaking point. How about trying to pause for a few minutes throughout the day to practice a breathing technique? These mood swings can make the person feel guilty or ashamed after an outburst of irritation. Guilt, in turn, can feed the anxiety even more, creating a vicious cycle that's hard to break. In these moments, it's important to be kind to oneself and remember that these reactions are not a reflection of character, but rather the pressure that anxiety imposes. A good step is recognizing these emotional patterns and, when possible, seeking help to learn how to manage them more healthily. Therapies focused on emotional control, such as dialectical behavioral therapy, can be extremely helpful for those dealing with these emotional ups and downs. And of course, irritability doesn't happen in isolation. It often comes with a sense of being constantly on alert, ready to react to any unforeseen event. We'll explore that in the next section, about how unexpected events can trigger even more intense reactions in those with anxiety. Anyone living with anxiety knows how overwhelming unexpected events can be. Something as simple as the phone ringing or an email arriving can trigger a disproportionate panic reaction. For many, these small stimuli are interpreted by the brain as threats, triggering an intense state of alert. It's as if the person is always expecting the worst, ready to react, even when the situation presents no real danger. This hypersensitivity to the unexpected can make daily life exhausting, causing the person to feel constantly on the edge of a breakdown. This heightened state of alert often appears in the most ordinary situations. A missed phone call or an unanswered message can set off a series of unnecessary worries. Did something go wrong? Is that person upset with me? What should be just a minor distraction turns into a trigger for a flood of anxious thoughts. Have you ever noticed how even a phone notification can make your heart race and your palms sweat? This kind of physical response is the body reacting as if it's facing an imminent threat. One way to manage these reactions is to reprogram the mind to see these events for what they really are, normal parts of life. Gradual exposure techniques can help desensitize the mind and body to these stimuli. For example, instead of avoiding answering calls, how about answering one short call a day just to practice? The goal is to reduce the emotional impact of these small occurrences, allowing the person to face them more calmly and with less tension. After all, answering a phone call shouldn't cause a panic attack, right? But it's not just the phone that triggers this panic response. Unplanned interruptions at work or a last-minute change of plans can spark the same panic. For someone who's always trying to control everything, any deviation from the plan can feel like a catastrophe. But what the person may not realize is that life is full of unexpected events, and not everything needs to be controlled all the time. Instead of fighting these moments, accepting that they're part of life can be liberating. As the saying goes, not everything that doesn't go according to plan is a disaster. This panic response is also often tied to indecision and the fear of making choices, something we'll dive deeper into next. Indecision is one of the most frustrating effects of anxiety. When the brain is constantly on high alert, making even the smallest decisions can seem like an impossible task. The fear of making mistakes, of choosing the wrong path, makes every choice feel like a burden. For someone suffering from anxiety, choosing between two options, whether it's a restaurant for dinner or a job opportunity, can be exhausting. This happens because the anxious mind is always projecting failure scenarios, exaggerating the possible consequences. The fear of making a mistake ends up paralyzing the person, preventing them from making decisions with confidence. This behavior is often fueled by perfectionism. The person believes there is a perfect decision to be made, and anything less than that would be a failure. The problem is that the search for perfection prevents progress. Indecision creates a kind of blockage where the person constantly finds themselves going back to square one. A practical example would be trying to choose an online course. Instead of enrolling right away, the person spends hours comparing different options, afraid of investing in the wrong course. This cycle of doubt can be endless if not consciously addressed. One way to combat indecision is to embrace the concept of good enough. This means accepting that in many situations, there isn't a single right answer. Doing the best with the information available at the moment is already a significant step. How about starting by applying this to small decisions? For example, when choosing something simple like what to wear, set a time limit for making a decision. Give yourself 5 minutes and go with the choice without looking back. These small practices can help reprogram the mind to trust your judgment more. Anxiety often puts a magnifying glass on the worst possible outcomes. This tendency to imagine what if is what makes decision-making so difficult. To counter this, a good practice is to focus on what could go right instead of just what could go wrong. When you're feeling indecisive, ask yourself, what are the benefits of moving forward with this decision? This cognitive restructuring exercise can be a powerful tool for someone paralyzed by indecision. And of course, indecision doesn't end once the choice is made. For many, there's the torment of revisiting past conversations and interactions, analyzing every detail in search of possible mistakes. This behavior of overanalyzing is something we'll explore in the next topic. A common characteristic of people living with anxiety is the tendency to constantly rethink past interactions. What for many would be a simple conversation becomes, for the anxious person, a detailed analysis of every word, every gesture, every expression. After an interaction, the anxious mind fixates on small details. Did I say something inappropriate? Did the person misunderstand me? These thoughts can last for hours or even days, creating an exhausting mental cycle. Have you ever found yourself mentally replaying a conversation multiple times, feeling increasing discomfort, as if you could have done something differently? This behavior, known as rumination, is one of the biggest thieves of peace of mind. When a person constantly revisits the past, it becomes difficult to enjoy the present. The problem is that by overanalyzing every interaction, the person ends up creating problems that don't even exist. The person starts imagining what the other person might be thinking and often concludes that they were misunderstood. This habit of rehashing the past, trying to fix something that's already happened, can be one of the most significant sources of stress and worry. A practical example of this overanalysis is after a work meeting or social gathering. While others move on, the anxious person is stuck in doubt. Was my idea well received? Was that comment misinterpreted? And so, they miss the opportunity to genuinely connect with the moment. The truth is, most of the time, others don't even notice the small details that bother you so much. After all, everyone is more concerned with their own issues than critically analyzing others. An effective way to deal with this rumination is to practice self-compassion. Instead of criticizing every detail of your interactions, try to treat yourself with the same kindness you would offer a friend. When you notice that you're reliving an old conversation, ask yourself, does this really matter now? Additionally, techniques like meditation and mindfulness can help break this cycle, teaching the person to return to the present moment and let go of unnecessary worries. And of course, overanalysis can lead to a behavior that may seem contradictory: overactivity. Many people with anxiety keep themselves constantly busy to avoid the discomfort of overthinking, something we'll discuss next. Keeping constantly busy is a common strategy for those living with anxiety. For these people, the frantic pace of activities seems like a solution to avoid mental discomfort. When you're always doing something, the mind doesn't have time to get lost in worries and anxious thoughts. However, this solution is just a way of avoiding facing what's really going on internally. It's as if the person is always running but doesn't know exactly where to. Have you ever noticed how sometimes you can keep yourself busy all the time, but at the end of the day, it feels like you didn't accomplish anything meaningful? This behavior, at its core, is an attempt to silence anxiety. When there's no free time, there's no room for troubling thoughts to invade the mind. However, living this way can be extremely draining. The person overloads themselves with activities, from work to household chores and social commitments, without allowing time for mental rest. The result? Physical and emotional exhaustion that only worsens anxiety. Have you noticed how often stress seems higher precisely when you try to do 1,000 things at once? Another point is that this need to always be busy can lead to perfectionist behavior. The person wants to do everything impeccably, as if this would prevent criticism or failure. This only increases the internal pressure and creates a cycle of self-sabotage where the more they try, the more they feel like they're not meeting their own expectations. A practical example would be that never-ending to-do list that never seems to shrink, no matter how hard you try. The truth is that sometimes stopping and reflecting is more productive than being in constant motion. One way to break this cycle is to learn to value downtime. Moments of pause are essential for mental health and can be much more productive than a routine packed with commitments. Try starting with small breaks throughout the day, whether it's time to breathe, have a coffee, or simply sit in silence for a few minutes. These small pauses can help slow the pace and allow the mind to reorganize. Have you ever tried giving yourself permission to do nothing for a few minutes? Of course, the desire to stay busy often stems from a negative internal dialogue, where the person believes they need to do more to be enough. This type of thinking will be the focus of our next discussion. Negative self-talk is one of the biggest enemies for those living with anxiety. That critical inner voice that never stops pointing out flaws, creating disastrous scenarios, and reinforcing feelings of inadequacy. You're not good enough. You always mess things up. These are classic examples of thoughts that dominate the anxious mind, feeding insecurity and low self-esteem. And the worst part is that often, these words repeat themselves so much that the person starts to believe them, creating a cycle of self-sabotage. Have you ever felt like no matter what you do, it's never enough? This kind of constant self-criticism can arise in any situation. Whether after a social interaction, during a work task, or even when looking in the mirror. The anxious person is always putting themselves down, as if they're in an endless battle to prove their worth but never reaching the finish line. This internal dialogue not only causes emotional suffering, but also prevents the person from seeing their own qualities and achievements. It's like they're always using a magnifying glass to highlight their flaws while ignoring their victories. A practical example of this behavior is when someone receives a compliment, and instead of accepting it, they immediately dismiss it. They just said that to be polite. Or after completing a task successfully, the thought is, "It was just luck. I won't be able to do it again." This kind of thinking undermines any sense of success and perpetuates the idea that the person is never good enough. But here's the key. It's possible to reverse this cycle with practice and intention. How about consciously trying to replace these negative thoughts with kinder phrases? I did my best. I am capable. This is the first step in changing the internal dialogue. Practices like daily positive affirmations and gratitude can help weaken the impact of this destructive dialogue. For example, writing down 3 things you're grateful for every day is a simple way to reprogram your mind to focus on the positive. Over time, the critical inner voice loses strength, making room for more balanced self-confidence. Have you tried incorporating this practice into your routine? By focusing on what you've done well, you begin to change how you see yourself, and with that, anxiety can gradually diminish. Of course, these negative thoughts don't just affect the mind. They often manifest physically, bringing a range of symptoms that impact quality of life. We'll explore that in the next topic. Anxiety, besides affecting the mind, can also cause a series of physical symptoms. A racing heart, shaky hands, tense muscles. These are just a few signs that the body is responding to constant stress. For many people, these physical sensations are so intense that it feels impossible to ignore them. Imagine sitting calmly, and suddenly your heart starts beating so fast it feels like it's going to burst out of your chest. This kind of symptom can be terrifying and often leads people to believe they have a serious health problem when, in fact, it's anxiety manifesting in the body. These physical symptoms can appear at any moment without warning. A panic attack, for example, can cause excessive sweating, difficulty breathing, and even a feeling of imminent fainting. For someone experiencing this, the experience is terrifying, and the first reaction is often to seek medical help to rule out a heart problem or another serious condition. What many don't realize is that the body is simply reacting to excess adrenaline as if it were preparing for danger that doesn't really exist. It's the classic fight or flight response activated without any apparent reason. In addition, chronic muscle tension is a common symptom in people with anxiety. The anxious mind keeps the body in a constant state of alertness, which makes the muscles tense, especially in the neck, shoulders, and jaw. At the end of the day, the person may feel generalized pain and discomfort without understanding why. A practical example would be when, after a seemingly calm day, you realize your shoulders are tense and sore. This is the body reflecting the mental stress that has built up. Stretching exercises and progressive muscle relaxation techniques can help alleviate this tension. Another common physical symptom of anxiety is gastrointestinal discomfort. The famous stomach ache caused by nervousness is a reality for many. The gut is extremely sensitive to stress, and anxiety can trigger symptoms like stomach pain, nausea, and even changes in appetite. For those with chronic anxiety, this can become a constant issue, significantly affecting their quality of life. Practices such as a balanced diet and including foods that promote digestive health can complement anxiety treatment. It's important to remember that although these physical symptoms are uncomfortable, they are not dangerous. The body is simply responding to the alert state of the mind. Over time, with proper treatment, it's possible to reduce these symptoms and regain control over your body. And now that we understand how anxiety can physically impact us, we return to the mind, where it all begins. If you enjoyed this content, don't stop here. There's much more waiting for you in the next video. Click on the one appearing on the screen and keep learning. And before we wrap up, I want to share something that has really helped me. CineBoost. It's improved my focus, energy, and even helped reduce anxiety in my daily life. If you want to learn more, check out the pinned comment. And the best part is, you only pay for shipping. Oh, and of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss any of our content.